Let's talk about how to stay safe while doing advocacy work. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I have spent several years working with violent offenders as well as victims of abuse. I want to respond to Keebler Elf's comment. Um, she says, how do you recommend that we as women stay safe while doing advocacy work? I think the biggest thing with advocacy work is to be, I can speak for myself. Um, First of all, I think it's good to be realistic about what that entails and have true lived experience, education, knowledge, bandwidth, but also be able to sort of talk to people about it. Um, so here's where I'll start. I think it's good to kind of have conversations. So, you guys know me here on TikTok. I haven't been on TikTok that long. I've had my podcast a long time. It's been around for 8 years. So I think, and not only that, I've been a therapist. I've worked with, inmate populations and things like that. And I've worked with attorneys for years and working with inmates and stuff like that, or even people who get incarcerated and go to jail and things like that. So I think the biggest thing to know is that people are going to ask questions, people are going to challenge you, people are going to make judgments about what you have to say. So therefore, you have to remember that if you're an advocate, you're not here to necessarily be a friend per se, if that makes sense. Like, you're here to kind of fight for people who can't fight for themselves, or put words to things that people can't necessarily put words to for themselves. And I've been doing that for years, not just with counseling, but also in doing sexual assault interviews, and working with animals, and all the different types of work that I've done. I won't get into it here, but I think it's important to give people, or whatever cause you're going for, a voice, and be able to educate others about it. I think too, it's good to always remember your passion and why you're doing something, right? Like, what does it mean for you to be able to do this, right? And it's not glamorous work to do advocacy. And so it's always good to, be able to explain it to your worst critic, in such a way that people can get it. And so I think most people are there to learn. There's some people that just don't want to hear it no matter what you say. And it's not the majority of the people that I interact with, as you see here on this platform. Um, so I think being realistic, going back to what I was saying, being realistic about not, people are not going to necessarily like line up to support you in advocacy work. So that they're just not. Some people will fall, but they'll say they will, but they'll fall by the wayside. So chances are you're going to be advocating alone, or you're going to be advocating with other advocates that come from other areas, but it's not going to be your tribe, right? So you have to be realistic about that. Number two, you have to be realistic about, like, people have emotions, and that's okay. So you have to have a thick skin, in which, I think I have that most days. Some days are better than others, but I think you have to have a thick skin, because people will surprise you and say the most interesting things. They will send you letters, they will send you, emails, they'll send you, DMs and all that kind of stuff. So you have to have a thick skin, in terms of what people say, and do. But I think the biggest thing, is, like, you have to have a purpose within the advocacy work. So you have to be invested in it. But I think also too, it's always good to have, it's always good to be as accurate as possible, or, so the way I've been trained my whole academic career outside of undergrad, so when I've gone to grad school and when I've done all my bajillion internships and things like that, I've always been trained to work. So that means I write and I speak. And I talk to you guys as though there's a lawyer looking over my shoulder, so when you work in the forensic field, you kind of want to have that, like, you always want to make sure that, like, you're working as though you have a lawyer looking over your shoulder. And in my case, there often is, so because I still do work with attorneys, so they're gonna, because I have a bigger presence online, a smaller, bigger presence, I should say, they're gonna be looking. I've done television, so a good attorney is going to be looking at everything. If they have the bandwidth and finances, within their firm, they're gonna be looking at everything, and so they're gonna be questioning me about everything. And so you always kind of have to have, your P's and Q's, your I's and your T's, everything dotted. And so when you feel like confident in what you're saying, and you feel like you can back it up with your education, because that's the first thing an attorney's going to do. They're going to ask you about your education, like, where did you go to school? Is that a real school? And I've been asked this, is that a real school? Is that an online school? Because they discredit online schools. And what sort of research have you done? What have you written? And blah, blah, blah. Can we see it? How many clients do you have? And blah, blah, blah. And how long have you been in business? And have you gone through this, that, and the other? So they're going to be checking, everything you guys are checking. Trust and believe, attorneys and things like that, double and triple and quadruple check and do their due diligence. Not just here, but LexisNexis and all other kinds of stuff. So I think once you're confident in what you're saying, you can legitimately explain it to the best of your capability based on your education, based on your training, and based on your experience. Your knowledge is your most powerful weapon. Your ability to explain it to people is your most powerful weapon. And so I think, and then you also have to be prepared that some people can be just, for lack of a better word, just nuts, and they can just kind of go off on the deep end for no particular reason. So you do have to be prepared for those types of things, and working at a prison, I have seen some things. I've also experienced some things where people have looked for me outside of that, not in a violent way. It's just that, like, we want to know about Dr. Jones. We want to know where she lives and what what she's doing and all that kind of stuff. And so people do get curious, and they do not maintain boundaries, especially when they are on the severe spectrum of personality disorders. So in that respect, you have to be prepared physically as well. And how you choose to do that is your business. So you have to be prepared to defend yourself physically if ever necessary. In advocacy work, it hasn't come to that, which I hope it never does. But you just always have to be prepared for those types of things, because people can surprise you. But I think your knowledge is your strongest weapon. Wanting to talk to people and connect to people, which I like doing with you guys and everybody else. So I've done, more than that. Like I said, I've done seminars and trainings and things like that. And so people are always curious and want to ask questions. But, you may have that one heckler, or you have that one person that wants to be a troublemaker. And then so you have to deal with that. Luckily on here, it's the block button. In other places, it can be a little bit more trickier to navigate. But I would say make sure you always have your checks and balances emotionally as well. So for myself, I go to therapy once a week, and I have been doing so since 2009. It was a requirement for grad school, and I kept up with it because the work that I do, from talking to you guys, but also, a lot of the work that I do behind the scenes that you guys don't know about, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into, the legal work that I do, just the clinical work that I do, right? Because I'm still a clinician at the end of the day. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks for asking. This is a good question.